Hello and good afternoon. I hope you all are fine by the grace of the Almighty, and I hope that you all are doing well at your homes. So, in the last clip, I talked about, um, Russian formalism. And today I'm going to talk about new criticism. And we will also find out some similarities between Russian formalism and new criticism. You'll find that both the concepts, both the approaches are somehow similar. Anyways, let us try to have a look at new criticism. See, this new criticism, it was impacted by Russian formalism, but it developed independently. So the fact is that initially new criticism was impacted by Russian formalism, but with the passage of time, it developed independently. Now, what is the similarity between new criticism and Russian formalism? See, both Russian formalism and new criticism, they examine literature on its own terms rather than focusing on its relationship to political, cultural, and historical factors. So the idea is very simple. They focus on the text only and they do not take into consideration the biography of the author and the time period of the author and the socio-political background of the time of the author. Right? And then we find that new criticism was the dominant trend in English and American literary criticism from 1920 to 1960. So for around 40 years, new criticism was the dominant trend in English and American literary criticism. Now the question is, what is new about new criticism? See, the title is new criticism. So we already have criticism. So what is new about this criticism so that the title has become, new criticism? See, to many critics, new criticism is a misnomer. Why? Because it is not new. There is nothing new in it. And if you analyze deeply, you will find that it is a continuation of the tradition of I.A. Richards, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, William Empson, and T.E. Hume. And it may be a further extension of their seminal ideas, right? So the fact is that, there is nothing new about it. And it is basically a continuation of the tradition of I.A. Richards, T.S. Eliot, and others, and it can be seen as an extension of their seminal ideas in relation to criticism. Fine. Now, this new criticism, it can also be seen as an offshoot of a literary movement, which is, practical criticism. And practical criticism it was pioneered by I.A. Richards at Cambridge University. Fine. So it may be an offshoot of practical criticism also. Now if you remember, in France also a similar movement was started known as explication the text, which means an analysis of the text of a poem. An analysis of the text of a poem. Right. Now this new criticism, it was a reaction to traditional humanist criticism. Now what happens in traditional humanist criticism? You know, this traditional humanist criticism, it focused on the matters extraneous to the text like biography of the author and the relationship of the work to history. But new criticism rejects this idea. Fine. And if you try to have a look at both, I mean biographical criticism and new criticism, you'll find that biographical criticism talks more about authors without books, and new criticism talks more about books without authors. Is that clear? So in biographical criticism, the focus is more on authors. And in new criticism, the focus is more on books. Fine. Now this new criticism, it made a revolution in the methods of reading a text. Now you may have two methods of reading a text. The first method is the traditional method, where you analyze a text in the light of the biography of its author and the time period of the author. And the second method is that you analyze the text only, and you try to get the meaning only on the basis of the reading of the text, and you do not focus on the biography of the author and the time period of the author. Fine. So this new criticism, it made a revolution in the methods of reading a literary text. It means a new method of close reading came to life. Now what is this close reading? Now it does not mean that you reduce the distance between your eyes and any book. No. It simply means you have to make a serious reading, and then you have to derive some meaning. Fine. Bressler is a critic, and he says that close reading is a detailed analysis of the text itself to arrive at an interpretation without referring to historical, biographical, or cultural concerns. So let me simplify. See, close reading is, it is a kind of detailed analysis of the text. Fine. So you have to read the text in detail, and then you have to arrive at an interpretation. And while giving this interpretation, you do not have to focus on the historical background of the book, on the biography of the author, and you don't have to focus on the cultural concerns also. The text is everything. So you have to analyze the text on the basis of the text itself. Right? So this is close reading, and it is called imminent reading also. It is known by the name of imminent reading also. Right? Now what happens in a close reading? See, in close reading, attention is paid to individual words, theme, imagery, metaphor, rhythm, meter, plot, and some other, devices. So it simply means that, you know, you have to focus on theme, imagery, metaphor, and some other, devices. And with the help of these devices, you have to analyze that text, or you have to arrive at an interpretation. I mean, you have to give a meaning to the text. Fine. So it means it was a strict word on the page approach. Word on the page approach to a literary text. And it focused on the work itself to evaluate its worth, to evaluate its value. Fine. Now some more similarities between Russian formalism and new criticism. You know very well that Russian formalism asserted that uh, literature was an autonomous body, and there was nothing beyond the text. The text was everything, and the author was dead. Right? In the same way, new criticism also considered a literary work autonomous, and therefore they said that it should not be judged or analyzed with reference to author's life, his time, and its intentions. These things are absolutely irrelevant. The text is everything. And whatever meaning you have to derive, you need to derive only on the basis of the reading of the text. Fine. So we can say that new critics had a rigid attitude to the text and they took it as an unchangeable entity, a solid and an unchangeable entity. Right. Now, something particular about new criticism. Actually, new critics asserted that literature cannot be reduced to any ideology or history. You cannot confine literature to any ideology or to any historical factor. It simply means that a text has its own meaning and you cannot relate this meaning forcibly to any particular ideology or to any particular historical fact, right? So you cannot confine literature to any particular ideology or history. Literature is independent. It has its own meaning. It has its own entity. Is that clear? So the main focus of the new critics, it was on the isolated text and they rejected its relations to the biography of the author and the history of his period. So they take a text, as, as, as an isolated entity. Is that clear? Anyways, now, these details, which details? Like the biography of the author and the history of the time of the author, I mean the historical milieu and socio-political conditions. So these details were considered as irrelevant extra-textual sources that distracted the reader's focus from examining the intrinsic merits of the linguistic pattern and form. Now try to understand, these details like biography of the author and the time of the author. They were supposed to be irrelevant extra-textual sources. And these extra-textual sources, they distracted the reader's focus from examining the intrinsic merits of the linguistic pattern and form. Fine. And the task of a reader is, to examine the intrinsic merits of the linguistic pattern and form. Because, you know, the medium of every text is language. Getting my point. And Russian formalism also asserted that, literature has certain elements and some linguistic characteristics which provide a kind of specificity to it. And this specificity is basically a kind of literariness or poeticity or literature nost. Getting my point? So, the task of a reader is, to examine the intrinsic merits of the linguistic pattern and form of any literary text. Right. So this is the brief introduction of new criticism. But this new criticism is not complete without new critics. So in the next 2 or 3 clips, I'll be talking about some new critics like T.E. Hume, T.S. Eliot, I.A. Richards, Clint Brooks, Robert Penn Warren, and F.R. Lewis. I hope the things are clear to you. Thank you. Good day.